I'm Sue Sherman from Sue Sherman Quilts. Today we're going to be making the quilt top for this art quilt called Turtle Encounter. You can make it from a pattern using your own fabrics, but today we're going to be using the kit. This same video can be used also to make this quilt called Giraffe Duo, which is also available as a pattern or a kit, and this particular one's done from the kit fabrics. Or the Bashful Honu, this quilt over here, this particular one is done with batik fabrics, but it also is available as a kit, and the kit fabrics are very similar to the ones that are used in the Turtle Encounter. If you open up the pattern, you will find that it has these detailed instructions. It also contains these pattern pieces, and we're not going to open that up right yet because it's big and takes up a lot of space, and this layout drawing. If you purchase the kit, it contains all those same things, and in addition to that, it contains these hand-dyed fabrics. The fabrics are all dyed in my laundry room, and they're all done in individual containers, and each one is unique. So if you purchase this kit and your friend purchases the kit, they won't be exactly the same. The only other thing that you're going to need in order to do the project is this piece of two-sided fusible webbing. It's 48 inches long and 24 inches wide for this project. The piece that you need is smaller for those other projects. I find that the Steam 2 Light product is the one that I would recommend for this project. It absolutely has to be a two-sided fusible webbing, and it has to be the kind that when you go to fuse the second side, it can be repositionable so that you can stick it on. You can stick the piece onto your other fabric and move it around while staying sticky before you iron it. If you don't have something like that, there's a lot of tiny pieces in this project, and if you can't stick them all down in the spots where they go, they're all going to get away from you. So it has to be two-sided and it has to be repositionable. The only other thing that you're going to need to do the project is some tools. So you'll need a marking pen. I have an ultra fine Sharpie, but it can be any similar kind of pen. I have a pair of scissors that I'm going to use for cutting the paper. I have two examples of scissors that I like for cutting the pieces of fused fabric for the rayage applique. I have a pair of tweezers, which I really like for working with the tiny pieces. You can use eyebrow tweezers if you want, they work fine, but I have sewing tweezers, and for me, I need a pair of reading glasses in order to see everything. So, let's get started. I'm going to move these things over here for now. The first thing we need to do is open this up, and you'll notice that the pieces fit within a piece that's exactly 48 inches by 24. So that this piece of two-sided webbing is going to go exactly right on top of here, and it's going to line up perfectly. So I'm just going to trace it like this. I don't need to cut anything. It should line up just right. The other thing that we need to make sure before we start doing any tracing is that we have the right side. So this particular product has a light grid. This particular grid is yellow, so it's not that easy to see unless you're right close up. That means this is the side that you can write on, so you can have it so that side is up and it's over top. I'm going to use a couple of little pieces of tape here, but you don't really need them. Your hand is steady. And I'm going to tape it so that they line up. And now I'm just going to trace. So when I start to trace, and if you find you can't really see it well enough, you could use a light table. I don't have a light table big enough for this. But what I do often use is my window. So you can tape it up to a window, and it's very, very clear to see there. You're going to need to trace all of the lines. So there's some solid lines, there's some dashed lines, and I'd recommend, if it's a dashed line, trace it as a dashed line. There's some dash dot lines. Those ones are for placement lines, and I would recommend also tracing those as dash dot. And then there's one spot where you have some very large dashes, and I would also recommend tracing those as very large dashes. The one thing you don't need to trace, and I'll repeat this, you do not need to trace the numbers. The numbers that are on each individual piece, I put those on for the convenience of people that are going to use some other method of making this quilt. But for my method of making this quilt, you don't need any of those numbers. They're messy, they take a long time, and I think that my method is the easiest way anyway. So I hope you find it that way too, and I hope you enjoy this. So let's just get started. I'm going to trace these. So just finishing up these last few pieces down here. You'll notice that I'm going nice and slow. If you get reasonably close to the lines that are there, I like to try to get as close as I can, but I've noticed that some of the students that I've taught are more approximate than I am. That seems to work. But I think the most important thing is that they should be relatively smooth, and that where you've got a space in between two different little scales, they should be fairly straight in between them. And in particular, later on, we're not going to be quilting in this video, but at some point you will be quilting this. And just remember that in between each one of these little scales that you're drawing, you are going to be needing to quilt. So you're going to need to run your quilting foot in between every one of them. So you need to leave yourself enough room to do that. So now I've copied all the lines, and now I need to cut them out. So I'm going to use my scissors that I'm okay with using on paper. I'm going to take off these pieces of tape. And I'm going to cut them out along the rough cut lines, which are these dash lines that go all around the outside. And they're rough cut lines. They don't need to be perfect. You just need to, at this point, you're just separating all the pieces. So I'm going to cut out around all of the pieces. So you notice that some of the pieces are actually inside this one big piece. And the reason for that is because when we cut this big piece, this is the under or the lower carapace piece, what we want to do is have just a little strip of the fusible webbing on underneath the large piece of fabric. So the fabric is going to cover the whole area, but the fusible webbing is just going to be around the outside. The main reason for that will become very obvious once you get to the quilting, because what that does is it means that you're quilting through fewer layers of the fusible webbing product, fewer layers of fabric ultimately, and that just makes the quilting a lot easier. And if any of you have tried quilting through anything that's got adhesive on it, adhesive of any kind basically is a challenge for quilting. So we want to minimize the amount of that to the extent that we can. So I rough cut around all of the pieces, and I put them in two piles. This is the pile that's going to be made from fabric 2, and this is the pile, the smaller pile that's going to be made from fabric 1. And this is the piece that I've cut out. I'm just going to actually not cut these large dashed lines at the moment, and you'll see why later. So the next step is to iron the fabric from the kit. It's been folded up, so you need to get those creases out. I can tell you that fabric, the cotton lawn fabric, can take a lot of ironing. It's very durable. It's a very fine weave, so you can use a lot of steam and really get those creases out. I have some fabric that's already been ironed. So what I'm going to do is, for these pieces, I am going to place them on the fabric. Now for this fabric 1, there's not a lot of placement involved. It's got an interesting pattern to it, but it's not really something where we want to do a lot of fussy cutting. So what we're going to do is remove, you see you've got the paper that we've just written on, then you've got inside some fine gummy fusible webbing, and then there's another piece of a more plasticky paper on the bottom. You're going to remove the bottom sheet of paper, and then you're going to stick this on top of the fabric. Make sure everything's all lined up. There we go. So once again, we've got the piece that we've drawn on, we've got the inside, the almost invisible actual piece of fusible webbing that is going to end up being on our fabric, and then the plasticky paper that's on the other side that needs to come off. And it's easier to pull off if you lie the whole thing flat on a table and remove it like that. That way nothing gets out of your control. I'm going to stick this on here. And it's another piece to put on there, but what I'm going to do right now is just cut across here, because what I'd like to do is show you how to do this piece. Clearly, if I remove this back sheet of paper, it's going to be very difficult to control this piece, and it's going to be very difficult for me to place it down on this fabric without everything just getting out of control. So what I'm going to do is do it the opposite way. I'm going to put this upside down, so with the writing towards the bottom. Then I'm going to remove the back paper very carefully. You might have noticed that the product really seems to want to stick to this back paper a lot more than it's wanting to stick to the front paper. So you've got to be a little careful in getting it off. But just need to be slow and methodical. It's not rocket science. And you'll notice that I've left more of the product on the inside. I didn't actually cut around these dashed lines yet. I'm going to cut those after I get the fabric mounted on them. Okay, there we are. It's all off. Now, I don't know about you, but I've made a lot of pies in my day. And one of the difficult things about doing pastry is lifting up a piece of pastry and getting onto a pie without everything falling apart. And the way you do that is by rolling it up. I'm just going to grab this pool noodle over here, and I'm going to wrap my pastry, my fabric around it. You know, wrap it around like this. Just like a rolling pin. And then I'm going to start over here, making sure that it's the right size. And I'm going to carefully unroll it over this piece. And before it gets away from me, I'm going to flatten it down like this all the way around. And as you can see, it's all nicely stuck down. So what I can do now, and I don't necessarily need to do, is go around the outside and just cut through everything except the fabric along these dashed lines. And it's really up to you how much of that you do. I certainly like to cut off these big bits that are sticking out. Obviously this wider areas made it easier. It made it more stable when I was laying it out, but we don't need them now. So that's fabric one. Fabric two is a lot more interesting, because what we've got here is a piece of fabric that is unique. And they all basically have the same colors. They're all made from the same dyes, but they're all placed differently, and you know, the scrunching is all a little bit different. So they all come out a little bit different. And what we want to do is now take these pieces of fabric, and these pieces are all going to be the darker colors. So you can see you've got this upper carapace, and you've got the two flippers, you've got the head, and then you've got these shoulder areas in here that are all done out of this fabric. So to start with, I'm going to start with the carapace because, and sorry, I use the term carapace. I know everyone else calls it a shell, but carapace is the correct word, and I'm a nerd, so there you go. I'm going to place it, I like to get a bit of red around the front. Maybe it's because the original photograph that I used to make this original turtle quilt, it had some red there, and the red is a perfectly natural thing on a turtle. It comes from algae. So what I might want to do is place it so that this part of the shell is going to be in this part of the fabric that's a little bit red. So I think I'm going to do that. I should mention here that this piece is the opposite of that. You can see it's going to go on the back. So what I'm doing here is the back of the fabric. Of course, this is hand-dyed fabric, and for batik it's the same. There is no front or back. If you happen to be using a printed fabric, then you're going to need to make sure that you use the back of the print. And I can tell you that after having made this with hand-dyed fabric many times, when I did try making it on a print, I had a lot of areas that I had to redo because I keep forgetting to put it on the back. But you do need to remember it goes on the back. Now, once again, I have to try to get this pesky back piece off. And I have to make sure that I get the actual gummy part needs to stay with the piece that has the writing on it. And it's going like that. There we go. Now I can tell you if you use the Steam 2, the regular version, so not light, it's a little easier to do this. But once again, when you get to the part where you're quilting, it's really much easier if you've got the light version. Especially as you're going to be, if you're going to do it the way I do it, where you're quilting through, you're going to be quilting all around these little pieces. You want to make sure that you're not setting yourself up for a difficult job there. So I'm going to put it down here with that red bit just there. Now, what I have left is the head and the left and right flipper. These are the upper pieces. And then I've got the shoulder and the neck. I want to make sure that the shoulder and the neck are in a fairly light area of the fabric. So I think I'm going to use this area here. The light area, as you can see, we've got lots of crease lines in there. These are showing the creases in the turtle's neck. You can see them in there, but they're not very visible in that one, are they? I like those to be visible. I'm going to do them in black thread. They're going to really look like creases, and the best way to make that be successful is to have enough contrast that it shows up. So I'm going to go ahead and put this shoulder piece over here, and I think maybe I want the flippers. I like to have a little navy in the flippers. I think because they're down low in the ocean. It's not a lot of navy on these ones. There's more on the head, but that's just my preference. You can do it how you like. Now, one thing you will notice is that there's plenty of fabric here. I do cut this bigger than the amount of fabric that's actually required because it is a hand dye. Sometimes certain parts of it don't turn out the way I might like. You might have some preferences that are different from my preferences, so always giving enough little extra play in the fabric gives you enough space to make sure that the pieces are going to all be they're going to all have colors and combinations of colors that are nice for you. So now I have all of my pieces, and they've all been placed on and stuck onto the fabric, and the correct fabric. I'm happy with them. What I've done is I went over to my iron and I pressed them ever so lightly, just to make sure that they stick down a little bit nicer. So certainly not the heavy press that you're going to give them later when it's permanent, but just enough to make them stick a little bit better than they were sticking before. So now we get to the fun part. I'm going to take my smaller scissors and I'm going to cut on the cutting lines. These are the solid lines just around the outside. So I'm going to go all the way around. I'm going to do it slowly and carefully. I want to make sure that the lines that I cut are as close as possible to the lines that were on the original pattern. And when I come to cutting these pieces that have lots of tiny pieces inside them, what I'm going to do right at the moment is only cut around the very outside of them. So just right around the edge, and you'll see there's a solid line all the way around the edge showing me where to cut. So now I have all my pieces cut. I've got the pieces cut out of fabric 2 and the pieces cut out of fabric 1. And I'm going to put them in a couple of piles. One of the things that we need to do is match them up. So this piece and this piece, they are both going to go there. So that's the right flipper. So, and this is the head. So we've got the top head and the bottom head. And we've got these two pieces, the shoulder and the neck, they're just by themselves. And then we've got the left flipper, the top and bottom piece. And I'm going to start by putting together the carapace. So what we need to do is take it so that the front side of the fabric is facing up. So that's the bottom piece. And now we're going to put the top piece on top of it. But of course, when we actually stick it on, it's going to be all cut like this into pieces. So I'm going to start by cutting a nice big piece so that you can see. I'm going to cut this piece here. And I'm cutting along the solid cutting line. So then I've had it this way up so that I can see the line to cut. Now I'm going to flip it over and put it this way up. So I'm going to line up the top piece and the bottom piece. And now, with the edges lined up together, and now it's pretty obvious where this piece goes. So what I'm going to do, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and I call it the jigsaw puzzle method. But to me it's like when you've done a jigsaw puzzle and you got one piece left, and you pick up the piece and you know where that last piece goes because there's a hole that's just the right shape. So I'm going to, there we go, take this piece off. And now I'm sticking just the fabric down to match this hole. So that was a nice big one, that's easy to do. But I'll bet you're wondering how to do this piece. It's got something like 100 little tiny pieces. So it's exactly the same. And I can tell you that these two pieces line up really quite well together. So if I cut these pieces out and put them on there using that method, they're going to line up pretty well. So I'm going to start on an edge, just because it's easier to do. So I flip the piece back over, I take off the backing, and here's where the tweezers sometimes are helpful. And I can see when I line this piece back up again, I can see a hole that's just the same shape as this piece. So I'm going to put this piece in right there. And I'm just going to keep on doing this until I've done all the pieces. So there are quite a lot of pieces here, but and it takes a fair length of time to cut them out like this. But you don't have to. You can sit there with a glass of wine or a cup of tea and do it. I often will take them downstairs. I take a big tray or sometimes a cutting board, and I just set that on my lap, and I sit there and with a piece and do it while I'm watching TV. I've left the project overnight, and one of the things that you might not know about Steam 2 or other similar products is that if you leave them for a long period of time in the air, they can tend to curl up. It doesn't really cause a problem, but it can make them a little bit more difficult to work with. So what I've done is I put it inside a large Ziploc bag. So now I can pull all these things out and everything's ready to work with. And you can see that I've got this, this flipper is now complete. And one of the things that I want to do with it before I identify it as fully complete is I'm just going to go around and check. I've put them down the way they came up and using the method that I showed you, this jigsaw puzzle method. But some of them might just not look fully centered to me, so I might just reposition them a little bit. If they stick over the edges of the underneath piece, it's not a problem. In fact, it can look pretty natural. So here, for example, you can see they do stick out over the edge, and that's intentional. The scales stick out a little bit over the underneath fabric. With this one, you can see that, especially with the big pieces, there can be a little bit of distortion once you start cutting them. Some of the tension gets relieved in the fabric, and it might distort a little bit. Nothing to worry about there. If you want to do some cutting around the outside, you can do that if you have to in order to make everything fit. This one you can see is a little bit non-centered. So at this point, it doesn't really matter if it's in the exact right spot according to the pattern, because once again, no one's comparing the pattern to your piece. What you want is to make sure that it looks balanced to you. So roughly the same amount of space in between each of the scales, and just sort of nicely balanced. The last piece that we're going to do is the head. And when you cut the piece out, you were cutting along all of the solid lines. And of course the solid lines, there's also these solid lines in here. So I'm going to cut this is the eye. And I'm going to, these scissors are a little sharper, I'm going to cut again the nostrils. You're going to need to do this cut it's a little detailed, but if you get it right, it'll make all the difference. Now you need to make sure that these holes are smooth. Can't have any sharp edges on a nostril. So there we go. Check it from the other side, it looks fine. So that's the underneath piece. And so now we're going to do the exact same thing with the upper piece. And I'm going to start with this big piece towards the neck. It doesn't really matter where you start. And I'm going to do this exactly the same way that I did the other pieces. Now we're down to the last few pieces on the head, and these are the pieces that are right here. These are along the ridge of the brow, and as you can see, that's the right eye, the brow ridge, and this is the left eye, brow ridge. These are small pieces, and these are the ones that really need to be as close as you can get to being the same as the pattern. And the reason for that is, like with any creature, getting the eye right goes a long way towards making it look like the animal that you're trying to make it look like. So I'm going to cut this little piece and put it on, and I'm going to do that for all of the pieces down this side of the eye. And I'm going to use the exact same method as before, all the way down. And you can see that I've cut away everything except just these little outline bits. That's enough for me to find my way and make sure that the piece is in the right spot. Now we come to the fun bit. We're going to assemble the quilt top from all the pieces that we've just made. I started by taking the background piece, the fabric 3, and I've cut it into a shape of 32 by 40 inches. You can make it a little bigger than that if you want. It's really just a question of how much extra ocean you have around the side of your turtle. And then I'm using the layout drawing underneath here so that I can see where all the pieces go. You might find it easier to tape the layout drawing onto a window and then put your fabric 3, tape that over top of the layout drawing. But I'm just going to work with it like this, and it shouldn't be too hard. So I'm going to start with the carapace, the biggest piece. I want to make sure I get that in the right spot. And I've already taken this bit off because it's a little bit complicated to. So that goes down like that. I'm just going to press it down now. Then I've got this piece, the shoulder, and it's going to go over here underneath. This piece is the neck and the shoulder on the other side, and you can see where the placement lines are. That tells us that we want about a 3/8 of an inch overlap. So I'm going to place this. Basically, I'm going to start by overlapping it this way. Then I'm going to place it, smooth it down a bit there, and then lift this up, and then put this piece down under it. Now that all looks nice and flat. I'm going to take the flipper and stick it on right about here. And I'm going to take this other flipper and I'm going to stick it on over here. And then I'm going to take the head and put it in the spot where it should just fit like a glove. Oh no, I can see this flipper needs to get moved up a little bit. This is why you need it to be repositionable. This is really great product where you can make sure everything is right before you have to actually commit. There we go. Now the last step is I've taken this little tiny piece of black. Now this is the only fabric in the kit that I don't dye myself. It's just a solid black. And but it's the same fabric. It's the cotton lawn. I'm going to need to cut a piece of black to go underneath the eye and to go underneath the nostrils there. Now you can, for the nostrils, if you don't want to use this method, you could just thread paint them in later. But I think it looks better to have the nostrils underneath rather than above. That's going to fit. So I just used a bit of spare steam seam that was left over from the other pieces. I'm going to cut it like this and stick it under there. It's probably easier if I stick it to the bottom of this piece rather than sticking it to the background. So I can go like, oops, like that. It's really not sticking on, is it? And then I can just trim it to make sure that nothing sticks out. And then this eye piece I'm also going to put in behind. There we go. So we're all finished. We've made this turtle and counter quilt top. The only thing we have left to do on the quilt top is to iron down all the pieces according to the manufacturer's directions. We want to make sure that everything is good and solid and ironed down onto the background so that it doesn't come off. And in particular, on some of these small pieces, we're not actually going to be quilting on top of the scales, only around them. And so the only thing holding them onto the quilt top will be the adhesive that's in the product. I hope that you'll come and join me for the next installment of this video when we'll learn how to quilt this quilt. And in the meantime, I want to thank you very much for participating, and I hope you enjoy making your turtle and counter quilt. Happy quilting!